Good morning to the colleagues from North South America. Good afternoon to the colleagues from Europe and Africa. Good evening to the colleagues from the Middle East and Asia, and maybe good night to the colleagues from East Asia. So I'm Marco Segone. I'm the chair of UNEG and also the director of the UNWomen Independent Evaluation Office. And we would like to welcome you to this UNEG webinar on communication and evaluation use. Today, we have really the privilege of having quite a number of senior colleagues. We have Alexandra Capello from the UNWomen Evaluation Office, and she's responsible for knowledge management in UNWomen. And then we will have Kseniya Temnenko, also Knowledge Management Officer, and Geeta, Batra, Deputy Director from the Evaluation Office of ZEP. And we also have Daniel Musiitwa, Communication Officer, and Kristen Milhollin, Online Communication Officer from the IAG at the World Bank. So really, I think we will have a great opportunity to have a great discussion and to learn from the different women, JET, and the so the webinar of today is really about a challenge that we have as evaluators. And the challenge is to go from this situation, and to me, despite of having a child there, to me that represents the past. The past where we as evaluators, we thought that our accountability was ending with the production of evaluation reports. So with the idea that once the evaluation report, our work is done. So we really need a mind shift from that situation to this one. Because if we really want evaluation to be impactful and influential, we have to make our best to make sure that evaluation will be used and will be transformative. Therefore, the frontier is moving from the production of the evaluation report to become much better in communicating the evaluation findings in whatever format, and we will hear a lot about what different kind of format we can use to improve our communication capacities, but also in facilitating the use of the evaluation findings. Obviously, the ultimate accountable for using evaluation findings remains with decision makers and with managers, not with the evaluation office. But I strongly believe that evaluators and evaluation offices have a very important role to play in facilitating the use. So the challenge that we're going to talk today is how to address the underutilization of evaluation. So how to get senior decision makers to pay attention to the evaluation context and to use it to improve the impact of the life of the people. Taking into consideration that evaluation is a technical process within a political environment, and therefore we have to be very savvy in the evaluation process. We have to be very savvy in deciding what should be evaluated and why, and to inform what kind of decisions, and what are the key stakeholders, what are the key managers that we should get involved from the right beginning of the evaluation process to ensure they buy in from those managers. And also taking into consideration that evaluation competes with several priorities within a very heavy workload of busy decision makers. So I think we need not to be too naive, thinking that everybody out there is waiting for our evaluation findings. You know, evaluation is obviously central to us as evaluators, but it's not always central to other people and managers and decision makers, also because they are absolutely very busy, and therefore evaluation is only one component, one element that competes with several other priorities. So the key question is really, how can effective communication help break through and stand out? So really, how can we improve our capacities to better communicate and facilitate the use of evaluations if we really want evaluation to be impactful and influential, and if we really want evaluation to be a strategic element of good governance to any organizations. So with this, I would like to give the floor to Alexandra Capello from UNWomen for her to walk us through the experience of the UNWomen Evaluation Office. So Alexandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marco. So just to give you a little bit of background before we get into the gist of the matter, as you may know, in 2015, the UNEG Working Group on Strategic Objective 2 developed a study called Evaluation Used in the UN System in order to better understand how agencies use evaluation. And it identified 6 key messages or enablers of evaluation use that are listed on the slide in front of you. Good communication, and we believe actually in UNWomen that good communication has a role to play in supporting each one of these enablers. For example, to build buy-in, evaluators have to tailor and target their communication to specific audiences by developing communication products throughout the evaluation process. Now, how can communications improve engagement with evaluation users and eventually increase evaluation use? How can evaluators improve communications to increase evaluation use? We will attempt to answer these questions in this webinar by building on the experience of 3 different agencies, as Marco mentioned earlier, UNWomen, the GEF, and the World Bank. But let us start with our own experience as UNWomen. So like anything else you wish to see improved, develop a strategy. And this is what we did last year well, throughout last year and actually this year in UNWomen. We have been investing in communication efforts which culminated in with the development of a communication strategy. And this slide shows the impact and objectives that UNWomen communication strategy is contributing to. The purpose of our communication strategy is to provide a results-based framework to enhance evaluation use at UNWomen and beyond UNWomen through communication. And with this, we're targeting internal but also external audiences with the idea to better connect evaluation and evaluators with policymakers and partners, and also better engage policymakers and partners with evaluation work. This slide shows a very summarized representation of our theory of change, but in a nutshell, the theory of change anticipates that relevant, timely, targeted, and efficiently communicated evaluation content informing decision-making and reporting, coupled with gender-responsive evaluation advocacy and facilitation, will lead to greater demand and supply of gender-responsive evaluation and eventually enhance evaluation use. It is important to note here that with this strategy, we decided to move away from communication being just a follow-up to evaluation or a dissemination activity, but rather we decided to embed communication throughout the evaluation process. For example, we tweet about evaluation field visits during the data collection phase. We also use partnerships throughout the evaluation process and partners to be a multiplier or a message multiplier. In fact, any corporate evaluation at UNWomen now has to develop a communication plan at its design stage, and each plan can be tailored to the specific evaluation, but a minimum communication package exists for every evaluation. To communicate and advocate successfully, our office calibrates its outreach to relevant audiences and seek ways to enlarge its reach by enhancing new population segments via different communication channels, while moving others up the ladder of engagement that you see on your slide. Maybe it's a little small, but the idea is that with the objective of gaining evaluation advocates and eventually evaluation demand, it is important for evaluators to identify the type of audiences they are engaging with and develop strategies to move those up the ladder of engagement. For example, from unappreciative audiences to indifferent, or from unaware audience to observers, and then from observers to supporters, and eventually from supporters to advocates. And this slide shows some example of how we moved those audiences up the ladder of engagement. Our strategy aligns with the principles listed on this slide. Communication efforts should be user-focused, guided, coordinated, and incorporated into all aspects of IO's work. They should be undertaken by evaluators that consider themselves communicators. And finally, they should be consistent with UNWomen's mandate and branding. What are some strategies and tactics to make evaluation results more accessible and user-friendly? Some of our tactics or products are listed on these slides, and these include our website, our evaluation magazine, Transform, which is the first gender-responsive evaluation magazine, social media, email announcements, evaluation briefs that summarize the main evaluation results, webinars, newsletters, and videos. Our strategy is to push out information or products and draw audience in, while continuing having audiences go up the ladder of engagements that I mentioned earlier. For example, using Twitter, so these tweets on the slide push out information on what we know, what we believe, and what we want our audience to do. There are some technical and some general messages addressing different audiences. It could be external audiences or internal or even direct users of the evaluation. The objective of the Twitter strategy is to have the audiences click through the links provided to further their learning on a specific piece of information or to strengthen their relationship with the organization, with UNWomen. And this slide is about the other end of the strategy, pulling in audiences, as I mentioned earlier. So these tweets draw in because they elicit engagement by clicking to our key publications. As mentioned earlier, Transform is the first gender-responsive evaluation magazine developed, and Transform is produced in lieu of an evaluation report. We do not produce evaluation reports and print evaluation reports anymore here in UNWomen. So it pushes out evaluation results and draws in audience to engage with gender-responsive evaluation and UNWomen and evaluation office in general. An interesting fact about Transform is that the first issue was downloaded 3 times more than any other subsequent issue. So this shows that there was a real demand and a real gap in terms of information that the audience was interested in. Our website has also seen some changes in order to attract users to evaluation content. We changed the layout of the website by embedding Twitter feeds. We also placed a video on a relevant topic front and center. We added a news page which provides current content, and we hope to do more in the future actually to make it even more engaging. But the same communication strategy is used for our website. It pushes out news, key evaluation messages, partnership information on UNEG or evaluation professional societies or original content like publications, and it pulls in audience by developing content that keeps viewers on the page and wanting to come back for more. We try to develop engaging, relevant, and timely content, as mentioned earlier in our theory of change. Another strategy that we use is that all our tactics, so Twitter, Transform, our website that I've been talking about, are all mutually reinforcing, meaning that the messages are reinforced through different sources of information, and we try to be as coordinated as possible with this. How do we know that communication activities precipitate a desired change? What metrics and tools are available to measure the effectiveness of communication activities? So here is the data. This table shows what tools are available to collect data on communications product utilization. Analytics let us know how many people engage with our communication products, but can we be sure that just because somebody downloads a report that they use it? The short answer is we can't always be sure. But the better the quality of that communication or of that communication product, the more likely it's used, and the more people see it, and the more likely it is used. So we can only identify a correlation between use of communication products and use of evaluation content. However, to demonstrate some sort of attribution, we will soon enter in a second phase of data collection by directly reaching out to our audiences through a survey. And I believe that one of our speakers later on will provide their own experience with surveys. So now let us dive deeper into a case study about our IEO website. So the metrics on this slide show that the website use has increased, the people are spending more time when they visit a page, and the people are looking at more pages per visit. Fewer people are clicking away quickly. So these are very positive results, actually. The website use has increased, but who has been using it more? What kind of visitors are coming to the website? These are important questions that we are trying to answer, and we yet do not have a full answer to. However, and you can see the pie charts on the slide. However, the blue color in the pie chart shows returning visitors, and the green is for new visitors. So we can tell you now that actually from 2012 to 14, the ratio new versus returning visitor was stagnant, was 50-50. But we've seen that in 2015-16, which is when we increased our communication efforts and when we developed our communication strategy, that there has been an increase of returning visitors. So these pie charts therefore demonstrate that communication efforts bore fruit. We're moving audiences up the ladder of engagement as more users are returning to our website. So this is really good news. These metrics should be, however, put into context. What kind of evaluation content helps build audiences and move relevant stakeholders up the ladder of engagement? Well, Bill Gates said that content is king, meaning the content drives the conversation. While it is very tempting to just go for the packaging, increase of evaluation use will only happen if the content is relevant, timely, and of quality, as stated in our theory of change earlier. So this slide shows page views for our website over a year. And looking at the graph, one would wonder what happened on April 2015 that increased the web traffic so much. Well, the answer is a one-of-a-kind and first-ever handbook on gender-responsive evaluation that was promoted through various tactics. On this slide, actually, there is an example of a Twitter promotion. So the lesson here is that the gender-responsive evaluation handbook is content that filled a gap in information, but it was also timely and relevant to our audience. And there is a large audience, or there was a large audience tuned in if the content is good and relevant. We recently launched a video on how evaluation and gender-responsive evaluation in particular can support the Sustainable Development Goals. The video was viewed more than 78% of other UNWomen videos on the same YouTube channel. And this is, again, another great example. When one asks what is it that contributed to this relative popularity of this video, well, the answer is, again, the content. The message is broad and relates to evaluation in the SDG era. The message was timely. It took advantage of all the discussions around the SDG and was issued during the last General Assembly. And the message was individual and unique. Few, actually, if any, videos exist about the intersection of gender, evaluation, and the SDG. And the format is engaging. It's concise and has a clear message. As hinted in our previous slides, there are many benefits to having a communication strategy. For example, it systematizes the dialogue with users throughout the evaluation process and not just as a follow-up to an evaluation. It clarifies evaluators' roles as communicators and facilitators, which report to trigger an important shift in mindset, as Marco mentioned also earlier, and eventually better engagement and connection with users. Most importantly, we have seen metrics improve in the previous slides. So as a result of the adoption of such communication strategy, there's been great progress in the use of communication products, and that demonstrates engagement of our audience with evaluation content. This being said, we're experiencing challenges that we're hoping actually this discussion between several agencies will help get some perspective on. For example, one challenge relates to attributing enhanced evaluation use to communication practices. We can see a contribution and could claim some correlation between reported evaluation use and use of communication products, but it is difficult to demonstrate attribution. And we can only assume that an improved evaluation use is the result of many factors, including of communication activities. Another challenge relates to our varied audiences and users. Considering we have internal and external audiences, the latter being more difficult to reach out to in a systematic manner, how do we measure evaluation use by our external audience? Is there a way to test their evaluation use other than through a survey? Maybe we will get an answer through this discussion. Resources are also a challenge. To adhere to high communication standards, communication expertise within an evaluation office is, of course, required. Within UNWomen, half of the staff time deals with communication and knowledge management, and that would be me. And we also use the services of a part-time communication expert for support that is invaluable. Other agencies have a team of communication and knowledge management experts. The value of communication is often underestimated by evaluators and therefore not seen as a priority in the light of other priorities. Communication, however, should be considered a shared responsibility in an evaluation office and not the sole responsibility of communicators, and should be prioritized in the office work plan. Finally, there's a constant tension between communication and evaluation that needs to be reconciled. On one hand, evaluation aims for specific, detailed, evidence-based information, while communication, meaning making information accessible, requires concise, to-the-point information. For example, condensing an evaluation finding into a tweet without losing the meaning requires immense skills, really. So moving forward, UNWomen would like to benefit from other agencies' experience and from the experience of other online participants, actually. And this is why we decided to organize this webinar in the first place, in order to strengthen even further the link between communication and evaluation use. So the Global Environment Facility and the World Bank evaluation functions will now present their own perspective on how communication can improve engagement with evaluation users and eventually increase evaluation use. So I'll now give the floor to my colleagues Geeta and Kseniya from the JEF. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello, everyone. I'm now trying to transfer presentation rights to myself. Hello, this is Kseniya Temnenko and Geeta Batra from the Independent Evaluation Office of the FGF. So we wanted to start with showing the theory of change from a recent publication. This theory shows that enhancing evaluation influence is dependent on several factors. Some of the factors are beyond our control as evaluators, but some are well within our grasp. Our ultimate goal, shown here on the right side of the graph, is improvement of environmental and socioeconomic outcomes. Throughout the evaluation process, engagement and communication is very important. Communication starts well before the evaluation report is ready. The earlier stages before the evaluation starts, when it is only planned, and during the evaluation are as important as evaluation dissemination. Before we start, we engage stakeholders to create awareness, to define expectations on the scope of the upcoming evaluation and usefulness, and agree on the roles. During evaluation, we engage stakeholders to clarify data, to get access to data, and to engage stakeholders to validate findings and discuss recommendations. And once the evaluation is complete, we have the final report and various communication products. And we engage, we communicate to disseminate findings and discuss the application of methods and approaches developed. We use a variety of communication channels as shown on this slide. Some of them are traditional, some of them are new. Some of them are static, and some of them are dynamic. Oh, sorry, I'm mastering. So we engage throughout the evaluation process. We engage with our stakeholders. We engage with clients with governance roles such as Jeff Council, Assembly, and the Replenishment Group. We engage with clients that carry recommendations of the governing bodies, such as secretariats, agencies, the country and country clients that involve work on monitoring and evaluation, beneficiaries, and broader audiences, such as environmental organizations, academia, research institutions, and civil society. Communication is embedded in our evaluations, including through our methods. So, for example, this slide shows the rapid impact evaluation, which is inherently based on communicating. We communicate with stakeholders and then triangulate their opinions with subject matter experts and with evaluators. We are using information communication technologies to engage and connect with beneficiaries. For example, this image shows the use of the cell phone technology to connect with, gather, and store information from a program beneficiary. So these were some of the examples how we engage with stakeholders before and during evaluation. Once the evaluation is complete, it comes up with messages, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. We have here a few examples how we use communication to explain findings. So this slide shows the analysis we have done for the Lake Victoria. So there is a complexity of information showing the changes in vegetation, but we are increasingly moving to more visualization to explain the complex findings. The next example is from another evaluation. So it shows how we used the value for money analysis to analyze the value of sequestered carbon in land degradation. So there were a few examples, right? But how do we know it is working? How do we measure? How well are we doing? We use some traditional metrics, such as statistics. For example, we track the subscriptions to our newsletter and also how many people unsubscribe. We track attendance of our events, the statistics for the website and for the social media. For example, a few months ago, when the new website was launched, we saw a spike in the website statistics. Last year, we conducted the needs assessment and client survey, which measured the level of use of our evaluations, which also helped us understand which evaluations were most used and the types of use, and communication channels and products preferred for our stakeholders. The management action record tracks the adoption of the council decisions made by the basis on the basis of evaluation recommendations. So if engagement and communication throughout the evaluation process are good and effective, the take-up on our recommendations is high. So this is all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Kseniya. So now we will hand over to our colleagues from the World Bank.
Musiitwa, and I lead communications here at the World Bank Independent Evaluation Group. And I'm joined by my colleague, Kristen, Milhollin, who leads our online communications. So what we wanted to share was the bank's own experience basically doing communications and using that to support evaluation. So by way of background, our team is part of what we call the Knowledge and Communications Department within the Independent Evaluation Group. And our unit is specifically focused on two work streams. One is positioning IEG, and when we say positioning is really how do we get IEG's visibility up there with our external and internal audiences. And then the other is really product support. How do we directly support our evaluation work so that we really get the most value, the most impact, the most relevance. And in many ways, these two work streams complement each other, but there are times where we will focus on one over the other. In terms of audiences, we really see ourselves as primarily reaching out to our internal stakeholders, but we also do pay attention to the external. So internally, again, we share the same audiences as Jeff and UNWomen, so it is the decision makers, it is the board, it is senior management, but we also look at some of the other stakeholders that you mentioned. Our mandate is really dual, so on the one hand, we are about accountability. We're about evaluating bank projects to say, look, did you deliver what you promised? And if you didn't, what can we learn from what didn't work? And if you did, what can we learn and what can we replicate? So that's the accountability side that we really do push. But we've also been asked, and more recently so, to really focus more on the learning aspects of our evaluation work. And that really puts the onus on IEG to make sure that our evaluations generate learning, our evaluations generate lessons that can be actually used in improving projects. that essentially is the framework within which we deliver our communications. So what do we see as our goal? We see our goal as really focusing on 4 areas. How do we expand IEG's influence? How do we make IEG more relevant to our stakeholders? How do we increase the reach of our communications and therefore IEG's reach? And how do we keep ourselves and our organization visible among our key stakeholders? We do that by trying to create or targeting the most relevant internal, external opportunities, and we aim to do this through a very balanced outreach plan sustained throughout the year. A lot of that is driven by the calendar of evaluations, but we also look to make sure that we are visible and we're keeping a cadence that runs throughout the year. So here's basically the range of channels that we use for our positioning and product support. So everything from websites to events to email. Again, very much the same channels that I think Jeff and UNWomen use. So in that respect, we're very similar. I did circle events specifically because when it comes to events, our approach with events is really twofold. On the one hand, we use them as a way to corral, to bring together the most important decision makers. And for example, when we are choosing our speakers, we're really thinking of is who is the person that is most in a position to take the decisions forward. And we want that person to be a speaker or a member on the panel, because we realize that if we can get them to participate in such a very visible way, the chances that they will actually engage with the material, at least to prepare before they come for the event, increases the likelihood that they will also want to engage with the findings downstream in terms of actually taking action. So for us, events serve a real purpose in that sense. But we also do them for the obvious purpose, which is to reach all the other stakeholders who may not be as key, but are important in terms of getting use and action following the evaluation recommendations that we make. We also have a bracket in there that we call the future, but that's really where we pilot innovations. Anything that we see in the market that we think might be useful, we try to reserve a piece of our time, our resources, and budgets to do at least 1 or 2 pilots every year. And Kristen will share 1 or 2 of the pilots that we have pushed out in the most recent times. So how do we know it's working or not working? One, we ask the client. We do an annual client survey. And over the last few years, we've mostly used that to gauge whether people are aware of IEG, whether people are aware of our work, whether they think we're relevant, and whether they think that we're having an impact. When we had the external review that was conducted of IEG about 1.5 years ago, one of the things that they pushed us to really emphasize is this whole question of utility. And so we now have specific questions that ask our audiences whether they've actually used our products and what products they have used. And so that gives us a sense of whether it's working, whether people are actually using our material. For all our events, we do what we call a post-event survey. And again, we ask a very specific question in there: was this useful? Was it not useful? Did your knowledge improve or did it not improve? And so we get to a qualitative sense of whether what we're doing is helping in any way. And we do that as well for our learning activities. So we make a distinction between what we call traditional outreach and what we call learning events, where we specifically are really trying to push our lessons out there. So in addition to asking the client, we also collect channel data and we monitor our KPIs consistently. And that's for everything from our website traffic to the downloads of our reports, through to the event signups and the qualitative feedback that we get, as well as through the other channels, the newsletter, etc. Like Jeff, we also do use the management action record quite extensively, and we find that that's a very useful tool for engaging with our senior colleagues and the decision makers in the units that actually get these things done. The other piece that we have tried to explore, although I have to confess we don't really have a systematic handle on this at the moment, and it tends to be very anecdotal, but we also look for attribution and citations of our work in the materials that are produced by the World Bank Group or in the decisions that they make. So for instance, 3 years ago we did an evaluation on procurement, and so when the procurement reforms were made by the bank last year, there was a very explicit announcement in there that IEG's work triggered the reforms. So we look for such evidence, and that really helps us to know whether we're having an impact or not. With that, I'll probably hand over now to my colleague Kristen, who will introduce herself. And
Thanks, Daniel. Hi, thank you so much, Alexandra, for hosting us today. So far, it's been a really intriguing discussion. And when I initially sort of approached the tiny piece of this larger puzzle that I would present, I really didn't want to repeat too much of what's already been said here so far. So just to say, I'm an online communications officer here at IEG, so understandably, I'm finding myself on social media an awful lot of time, a good part of the time. But another part of what I do is to try to be creative with the use of our online tools, particularly our website, not only to track and to try to interpret how the numbers that we're looking at might sort of reflect how our reach and our engagement and particularly the understanding of what we're doing is sort of being seen by the outside, but also to try to find new ways to reach these audiences. Right now, so you can say that this is a pretty typical report summary for us, and we really take most recently we've decided to use as one of our really key performance indicators report downloads, because at the end of the day, the main products that we produce are reports. They are in the form of a PDF, and when somebody downloads that report, we know that there's a good chance that it's going to be it's a large commitment for them to read it, and we know that means that they're definitely interested in the subject matter and they're willing to make that commitment. And we've really been excited to see some of our experiments result, particularly a recent renovation of our website, result in an increase in report downloads. Now, going on to some of our more recent pilot projects. One is what we call the IEG Lessons Series. And this came about because we have a particular kind of report. It's a project-level evaluation. And it's we call it a Project Performance Assessment Report, a PPAR. And for anyone who's outside of the World Bank, they probably wouldn't have, that particular title has no meaning. So something that we realized is that these are reports that come after a World Bank project is completed, and it involves site visits and quite a lot of insight as to why that project either did well or didn't do well. And it's certainly relevant not only for the operational staff here at the World Bank, but for really anyone in that particular country who might be considering that maybe a similar project, whether internally to their government or with another aid organization. And so we really saw this as an opportunity to expand the reach of the knowledge being generated by this particular report. And so one thing we decided to do was to create a really abbreviated but direct and to the point summary of the overview of this report, because generally the reports, they can be anywhere from 50 to over 100 pages. And they have a rather concise overview, but even that is quite long for someone just skimming through the material to try to get to the heart of the message. So we even abbreviated that overview of the report, and we kind of keep it to a regular format where you talk a little bit about what the project was, you go over a brief overview of what the ratings of the project were, and then you go straight to the lessons learned from the project. One thing that's very important and key to the success of this particular pilot was to make sure that we experimented with the titles of the story to keep them as specific and engaging as possible, because in this day, and I'm sure for those of you who work online, people don't have a huge attention span when it comes to skimming through to find information that might be relevant for them. You have to get to the point right away. Why should you read the story? And that usually is something that someone can garner from the title of the report or the story that you're giving them. So we decided to create 2 or 3 or 4 titles for each of these. We call them the IEG lesson series, which are based on these reports. And the more attention that we paid to the title of the story, ultimately, the more successful these particular stories were. And what we were able to do is that we created an online-friendly summary of the report, and we created several opportunities within that online summary for someone to download the report. We're really just trying to pique the interest of as wide of an audience as possible. And then we spent some time really picking apart the audiences that might be interested in that particular online summary. In this case, it was the Metropolitano Transport Project in Peru. Now, we decided to use mostly social media to try to target a Peruvian audience. And ironically, this particular story wasn't even printed in Spanish at the time. We didn't translate it. But we were able to reach some community organizations in Peru. We were able to reach a really wide audience and substantially increase our download rate just by being sort of creative with both the title, the format, and very abbreviated with the summary, and also very targeted in our marketing. And since then, we've done several successive project lesson series stories, and each one of them has substantially increased the download rate of this particular report, the PPAR. And so we're pretty excited to continue with this particular, it's no longer a pilot now. We've just decided to go forward and make this part of our communications strategy. Another project that we piloted last year was what's called an interactive report. And this particular pilot involved, I wish there was a way for me to do, I can't share the actual website with you, but the idea is this particular evaluation that we chose to pilot the interactive report was just really extraordinarily rich in its themes and in its recommendations, and we thought it was something that would have perennial interest. And that's really the key. You have to find a report that isn't, or an evaluation whose recommendations are not going to be dated right away. They're going to have to stay relevant for quite some time. So what we did is we got together and hired a technology company and a professional writer who in many essences is more of a taxonomist, to break apart the evaluation into several themes and related recommendations. And what anyone can do when reading this interactive report is quickly skim the many themes of this particular evaluation, collect together all the themes and the recommendations that are relevant or interesting to that person, and then create a summary that they can either save, download, or print, so that you don't have to comb through what ended up being several hundred pages of a very in-depth evaluation to find information that's relevant to you. You could pretty much point to it and use it right away. The results of this particular pilot project, I would say at best they're mixed. In some ways, it's been a huge success. One, it's really pointed out that if you turn what's a typical evaluation into an interactive report, it becomes, in a way, evergreen. It's no longer really tied to the time and place that you've released that information, and you always have the opportunity to update that information at any time. By the time the interactive report came out, the evaluation that it was tied to was over a year old, and we were able to garner at least half as many page views for the interactive report as we did for the interactive evaluation in half the time. So in that respect, it was a success. I will say that the initial cost was substantial, and if we were to do it again, I think it's replicable, but you would have to invest in a very good taxonomist and writer, because the trick here isn't really the technology. It's diving in very much into the detail and the themes and the sub-themes of the reports, and making sure that every idea that's within the report is well tied to another related idea. That's really the concept behind it. So with those 2 pilot projects, I think that concludes our presentation to you. And again, we thank you for including this. It's been a really interesting discussion.
So thank you to all the presenters. So we collected a couple of questions that people sent us online, but maybe before we get to the questions, we have also online our colleague Geeta, who is our communication expert in the UNWomen Independent Evaluation Office, who would like to make just an additional comment before we start with the questions. Greta, are you with us?
Hi, Alexandra, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, great. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to everyone. So I've been working with the evaluations unit at UNWomen for a little over a year now, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what I wonder if anyone else in the audience is experiencing the same thing, which is the relationship between an evaluator and a communications expert, because what we found is really that it takes both ends as far as understanding what's inside of an evaluation and how to best communicate that. And sometimes the goals of evaluators can seem like they're at odds with the goals of communicators. Some of the good practices, for example, that I heard Kristen and Daniel talking about as far as a clear, concise message, as far as writing several titles, holding the attention of the audience, at sometimes is that it seems anyway that it's at odds with communicating an evaluation in the most precise way. And Alexandra touched on this when she was talking a little bit about social media, and that's definitely been my experience. How can we condense a very complex evaluation finding that sits inside another complex context into a tweet that's both accurate and engaging? And that seems to be a sticking point, a place of difficulty, a place where we have a lot of dialogue and a lot of conversation. So I just wanted to open up that conversation. I was wondering if maybe any of the evaluators or communications experts in the audience were having similar kinds of dialogues within their own department. We've really found that it's an essential conversation to have between the evaluator and who knows the evaluation better than anyone and the communications expert. So I was wondering if anyone had a similar experience. And I'm actually going to throw that right back out to Kristen and Daniel, because I wonder if from their presentation I have a sense that they might have something to say about that.
Thanks for that question. I think you really touched on something that for many of us who are in the field of communications in general, and particularly communicating in an environment where we're really required to be as precise as possible. There's always a tension, and there's always an interesting dynamic when you try to sort of enforce the idea of being concise on people who really are looking at something in depth, and it's almost impossible to do so. But I don't think it's impossible. I think that the person in the communications role has to be empowered to impose a certain set of standards, particularly standards to be used online and in a social media context. I think at the end of the day, we should be able to say this is an area where we think we know and we have documentation and statistics to prove what works best in this environment. And if we can keep things as concise as possible, it's going to benefit us, and it is going to get this particular report out to as wide an audience as possible. Another thing to say is, you know, at the end, you're not reducing the total message overall. You're creating an incentive for people to read further. So think of it as giving people a taste of the entirety of the report, and not trying to reduce the entire report into a simple message. I hope that's really an important distinction, I think.
And it kind of really tallies with where we started with Alexandra, this whole ladder of engagement. If you're moving people from being totally unaware, then you want to be producing products that really tease them or really sort of incentivize them to want to find out more. So you're really producing products that are geared to somebody who can then sort of arrest their attention, who wants to glance or scan that information at a very superficial level. But also there are audiences that are really important to us who just don't have the time. And so again, there is a market for these sort of summarized versions, and we really sort of push those. But having said that, it's also important to recognize that the people who are going to ultimately implement this, once the big guy has said, you know what, you need to pay attention to this, want to see that detailed report. So you want to make that available somewhere, but recognize that it's a much smaller audience and not mix the two.
We laugh. We sometimes refer to it as a conversion funnel. You start, the concise message is the message that reaches the broadest audience possible, but you always create links and you make sure that they're they're really enticing. You always create the ability for people to dig down to the next level.
Does that help? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think those are really insightful answers. And this was something that, as myself as a communications professional, that I guess I hadn't anticipated in terms of the depth of information that's available and that evaluators would like to not just disseminate, but create learning, and the channels for doing that. And sometimes it feels a bit like sticking a round peg in a square hole. But I think that's a really important distinction that Kristen hit upon, that there's a difference between communicating and reducing a message, and then, of course, creating incentive for engagement in that fuller message. So I thank you for that information.
This is Kseniya. Temnenko. I wanted to resonate with what you were saying. We also faced similar challenge, especially because when we communicate evaluation findings, we have to stay precise and key to the message. And we also follow the rules that were outlined just in this discussion, that our role is to trigger, to get attention, to make our stakeholders read the full documents whenever it's possible. But it also helps to have champions, a senior manager advocating for better communication. And in our case, it's our senior management of our office that's encouraging us to communicate the way as if we want to engage broader audiences, external audiences that may not be familiar with internal language and internal details. So it helps.
Thank you, Kseniya. I think actually this is a very interesting comment, and it also resonates a lot with UNWomen, because we experienced a similar process where our senior management was actually pushing us or asking us to be better communicators, and this is how we developed this communication strategy, and also in partnership with our senior management and our direct users. So this process of developing a communication strategy really helped us also getting closer to our main users, and that was a direct demand and request from them. So that was very welcome. So we received a couple of questions online. The first one is actually for the World Bank, for Daniel and Kristen from Niran Saraf. How do you analyze the qualitative feedback, and how do you track attribution and references to your materials? Daniel and Kristen, are you still online? We cannot hear you. Okay, maybe we can go for the next question in the meantime while you work your audio. So we have a second question for actually the Jeff, for Kseniya, from Regine Skadubowicz. I'm sorry if I'm mistaken in pronouncing your name. So Regina is saying that your point on communicating the evaluation throughout the process is a very valuable point. However, do you need to select the target audience at each of these stages? And how do you decide on the target audience for each stage?
Thank you so much for a good question. So yes, when we plan our evaluations, we include the section on stakeholder engagement, where we outline who are the key stakeholders. And typically, this plan stays throughout the evaluation. So it's from the beginning and and until the evaluation is completed. Then once the evaluation is going closer to completion, we revise, we look again at the key messages that come through this evaluation and validate like who are additional audiences that we should target, what channels and what methods we should address. But typically we are looking at several groups: primary stakeholders, the decision makers, who is in the position to make decisions. Secondary, who else will benefit from the evaluation findings and evaluation process? And third, how can we contribute to the broader knowledge, for example, of the evaluation practice or of the practice of global development and environment? I hope it answers the question.
Thank you, Kseniya. So we actually have online Niran Saraf, who would like to ask a question. Niran, the floor is yours, if you can add your microphone.
Oh, thank you, Kristen, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So I just wanted to make a comment regarding the communication. When I was doing a master's program, one of the very interesting courses that I took was business narrative and storytelling. And I think one of the things that are very important when we're communicating our evaluation results is really to put ourselves in the reader's shoes and figure out what could be a very interesting title, that could grab the user. So, and what is the user interest? Why am I reading the report? So why am I reading the impact, the safety nets and their impact on gender as an example? And then instead of focusing just on the results and the details, I think one should look at a conclusion or an impact, and stating that in a title or stating it in the first sentence of a report. So that this way the user is saying, okay, I'm going to read this because now I'm interested in really figuring out how did they get that impact. So, and that you're giving them the conclusion at the beginning so that they understand the purpose of the report. And I think it's very, very important engaging the user in that so that the user knows what they're reading, why are they reading it. And at the risk of, I don't want to sound like it's headline news, but really think of headline news trying to grab you when they're trying to convey a piece of information. Then afterwards you're like, oh my God, is that all? Or it could be very interesting. And I think that's the perspective that a communicator should come in working with evaluators and not be very focused on how great our study was or how detailed our information. Really, what was the end result? And then from there, take it backwards, and the reader can read further if they're interested. It's just a comment I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Niran. Now, it's a very interesting comment because, and we experienced exactly what you were talking about here in UNWomen. Our evaluators had to change their mindset in the way they would write, in the way they would present the findings, and that is something that as yet I think to take root in our evaluation practice is to think of the user first and what is it that they want to know first. So thank you for this comment. I think the World Bank, Kristen and Daniel are now able to use their audio, so the floor is yours to answer the previous question.
Great. I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question?
Of course. So how do you analyze the qualitative feedback, and how do you track attribution and references to your material?
So again, I'll just preface what I said before. This is something we've not really perfected yet. So we're not as systematic as we want to be, and there are probably things that we're missing out there. We're sure of that. But what we have done is really at two levels. So let me deal with the question of attribution first. We are really, again, using either text analytics or using media monitoring. We're always on the lookout for what people are saying about IEG. And then when we know that the bank is taking reforms around things that we have evaluative evidence, and we know we've made that evaluative evidence available to them, we're always monitoring to see when they eventually take action, any attribution that is given to IEG is something we try to capture. We probably are missing some things, but usually on the bank side, we do get a fair amount of that. So I can think of procurement. Last year we did something on early childhood development. We did something on energy, electricity access, and we have seen very sort of clear attributions by World Bank Group management, and we sort of use those as a measure. On the broader issue of qualitative feedback, really what we are doing is the survey in the different formats that we deploy it. So we do the annual client survey where we go out to our stakeholders, anyone that we know we have. We try to be disciplined about capturing names for our lists so that when we do the survey at the end of the year, we go back to all our stakeholders, external and internal, and give them the opportunity to tell us how we're doing. And so that survey also has an open-ended aspect to it, so we start to capture very qualitative aspects of the feedback. So we have, the 8-scale, the 6-scale questions where they'll tell us you're doing well on use, on attribute, on all these other attributes, but then they have these open-ended spaces where they tell us exactly how they feel, and then we look at that, we mine that, and use it. Likewise, for the post-event surveys, when we do them after we've done an event, or the post-learning surveys, we always have an open-ended question, and we try and keep those very simple. So we say, what do you want to see more of, what do you want to see less of, and tell us anything else that we're missing. And then we really mine that to give us a sense of the qualitative views coming from our audiences. I hope that's helpful, but I'm also interested in hearing what others are doing and what others think we could do differently.
Thank you, Daniel. Do we have any other comments on this question from our participants online?
Yeah, sure, Alexandra. As I was listening to what Daniel was saying, I think that we have a similar problem. That we haven't quite perfected it yet. I think we're maybe even in earlier stages of capturing that attribution metric, or even trying to discover what is the best metric to use. I think triangulating that data is it's a tough one. And we also are interested in that next stage, which is developing a survey to measure at least attitudes, measure some of that qualitative feedback on the quality of the communications, the usefulness of the communications, and that's something that I think is always a tricky one to pin down. So we've experienced some of those similar challenges, and we also have experienced, I think, some similar positive results as we look through our key performance indicators and take a look at those Google Analytics. And anyone who can spend time on Google Analytics, I could spend all day cutting the data different ways and looking to see what exactly in a communication, in a tweet, for example, or in an evaluation brief, that is drawing the audience in and bringing them back for more. So that's something that is that we're really in our beginning stages of trying to develop that metric that tells us that the improvement in evaluation use can be attributed to XYZ communication product. So I appreciate that response from the World Bank.
Thank you, Greta. Unless the presenters would want to add any other comments, in the interest of time, I think we should be closing the webinar soon. I know there are some questions of participants still online. We're collecting emails as we speak so that we can then follow up individually for those that unfortunately we weren't able to take the questions today. So Daniel, Kristen, Kseniya, if you have any final comments, please feel free to take the floor.
Nothing from us, but just thank you for having us today.
Thank you, Kristen. Well, actually, I would like to thank all the presenters and the participants. This has been a very interesting webinar, and I really hope that this will elicit more cross-organizational learning and also contacts in the future to learn more from each other. It's been also very interesting for us UNWomen to see the different level of engagement of other agencies with communication, and we're at the very initial stage, so we're very happy to learn from others, and we hope that we will continue the collaboration in the future. So thank you so much to all. Just maybe one last point is we will try to make this webinar available online as well for our audience to further engage also with us and with communication and evaluation use. So thank you all.